Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Noz Urbina, and this is Omnichannel X's Omnichannel Podcast. Omnichannel X is brought to you by Urbina Consulting. Omnichannel X is our international learning portal where we host the thought leaders and case studies we think will be most helpful for content-rich organizations trying to build better relationships across all touchpoints. Now, enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. My name is Noz Urbina, host of the Omnichannel X podcast and founder of Urbina Consulting. I'm here today with Tony Byrne, founder of the Real Story Group. Tony is an expert in all things content technology stack, and I am very much looking forward to this conversation. I've known Tony for like over a decade now, I think. He's been a speaker at Omnichannel X events in the past. This is his first time on the podcast. And a lot of things have happened in the past 10 years of content technologies. So, Tony, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell people a bit about your background.
Yeah, Noz, great to see you and actually spend some time just riffing on these topics. I've been covering content management systems since the mid-90s when I was a frustrated early implementer of them. And noticed by the late 90s when there were analyst reports coming out about some of these technologies that our experience actually implementing some of these tools was very different than what the analysts were saying about vendors that were in the so-called top right winners quadrant. And I thought there had to be a better way to tell the real story from an author, editor's, developer's perspective on how these technologies really worked, as opposed to how analysts said they work. And then I learned very quickly that traditional analyst firms actually get paid by vendors to say nice things about them, and concluded very quickly that really the only way to get real about this was to work on the buyer's side of the table. And so that's where we've been for the last 2 decades, advising enterprises on their content and other marketing technology decisions.
Awesome. I love it. I did a lot of CMS selection consultancy work in my earlier career, but decided to move up the chain as I'm sure we'll come out in the discussion that making the right technology decisions, you have to have a strategy worked out, and some understanding within the organization of why are we making this move? Why are we investigating this kind of technology at all? And so I think that I understand your role in this, and I think we come at it from 2 different perspectives, which should make an interesting discussion. So right now, what I'm seeing is kind of big trends in the tech stack arena are, I think number one is obviously the rise of headless. That's been making a big name for itself. It's been very interesting as someone who was in structured and decoupled systems, in the late 90s, to now see this kind of new batch of headless CMSs come up and suddenly take the world by storm. As well, there's a lot going on with DAM. I'm seeing some interesting acquisitions and some interesting functionality coming out of the DAM market. I'm also seeing more customers asking me about DAM as opposed to content management, or what we call traditional content management systems. So, and then there's AI, so what do you see as the most important trends that our audience, if you're into omnichannel, as the Omnichannel X podcast is, where should they be keeping their eyes on the market?
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned at least 2 of those. One is the evolution of DAM. And I think that one of the things that we're beginning to learn is that all of our contents are assets. So at some level, we should be thinking about small a asset management, whether those are images and video, which was the traditional purview of digital asset management, or narrative, or even we see a lot of data being presented as content, right? And so data sometimes becomes content. And so you need very specialized tooling to be able to handle all of that. And there is an offshoot of the DAM marketplace that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years that we call omni-channel content platforms that can handle all of these different content types, but critically are also, the technical term for it is they're object oriented, which means that they can handle all the parent-child relationships and the variations that you need if you're going to be omni-channel, if you're going to do personalization, and if you're going to set yourself up for AI success. And so, here's where then AI is very interesting in this world, where one of the big blockers towards both omni-channel and personalization was you could have a great content strategy, but if that strategy required you to execute on 40 or 50 different variants for all of these different content types, the actual production or the execution of that strategy, became very difficult and was frequently a roadblock. And so now there's at least a promise that AI can help us by auto-suggesting or auto-generating all these different variants and then tracking them. And that's obviously, it's not the full story on AI here, but it's part of the story is in terms of omni-channel is there's a role for AI if you can get your component content house in order, but you have to do that first.
Yeah, I think you get me on my high horse right there, because I'm always talking about how there's too much excitement about AI right at the customer touch point. Like, how can we, give our content out through AI? How can we deliver through AI? How can we get our chatbots up and running? Whereas I think the real story, to borrow a phrase, is looking at AI throughout the life cycle. So right up from initial research and insight gathering through to brainstorming and strategy development, editorial planning, customer journey mapping, requirements development, then authoring all this stuff, like making this amount of content.
It's so fascinating that you would say that, because we just held one of our councils. So we have this MarTech council of MarTech leaders at large enterprises around the world. We meet in person twice a year. We just met earlier this month at the headquarters of one of the firms nearby here in Virginia. And, we divide the world into generative AI, insights AI, and decisioning or predictive AI, right? And there's often different tools that do that. And what they were all telling us was that none of those you can't look at any of those in isolation. In other words, you can generate all the variants you want, but if you don't have insights into which variants are performing better, it's kind of just a turkey shoot. And then you have to figure out the logic side of this. Which variants are we going to show to which people at what time and why?
Which is its own form of AI.
And so there's a whole AI lifecycle here around decisioning, generative, and then insights. And, we've been evaluating AI vendors. We're just about to release our vendor evaluation research. And one of the things we discovered is that no single vendor is good at all three of those. So once again, the enterprise is really in a situation where you have to assemble a kind of an AI pipeline of capabilities and not just look at generative in particular in isolation.
Yeah, we actually refer to it as your intelligence anatomy, which is this what are the ears, what are the eyes, what is the mouthpiece, what is the brain and guts of your tech stack. And rather than thinking about it as like, oh, I'm going to get ChatGPT, where is AI going to fit in all aspects of what we're doing? It's by the rise of ChatGPT, it's even in the name, it's distracting. It's kind of created a gravitational pull in the thinking about artificial intelligence in a certain direction, as if it's chatbots and or being like search replacements. So people are thinking like you open it up and you put in queries, you ask it a question and it gives you an answer. You give it a prompt and it gives you a response. Where as opposed to thinking about it as computing, we use computers all over the place to do all sorts of different things. We don't imagine that every aspect of our tech stack, much to the major vendors' chagrin, every aspect of our tech stack is just going to be handled by one piece of software, one vendor. Why would we ever do that with AI? It makes absolutely no sense. It's never happened before in computers. Right. Why would it happen now? So I think that one of the main issues is not the AI technologies. It's the understanding and vision and strategy to put them to use. People don't know we're in a chicken and egg kind of vicious circle here, where people don't know what AI is really capable of. They don't have the insights of how to bake it into their workflows. And so how do you make good buying decisions about that in that situation?
Yeah, that's exactly the conversations that we're having. I mean, the good news is that the companies who are really smart about this are building their own guardrails and their own policies and procedures around this. And then having done that, let people experiment, because you can't always know in advance what this is. And people tend to learn things better if they learn, they learn themselves.
Yeah.
And there are, they can then discover sometimes there are technology and vendor mismatches in terms of what you're trying to do and what a particular vendor is really best at. And so we're seeing already a lot of mixing and matching going on.
Good. Well, good. I think that's the integration of multiple tools with different capabilities has always been the way to go.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in what you said about digital omnichannel content platforms. So lest we go another year without a new acronym. We already
Yeah.
got GPT in our lives this year.
Yeah.
So what is the omnichannel content platform as opposed to a DAM, like a Viva Vault or an Aprimo or our usual suspects
Well,
binder?
when we first started looking at this about 5 years ago, I hated the idea of yet another 3-letter acronym, and I hated the idea of naming a marketplace that didn't exist, because that was never really our thing, right? But it was something that was happening and it was real. And so we decided to give it, for better or worse, to give it a name, which we called omnichannel content platforms. And it was a spin-off from the DAM marketplace, and a lot of big name DAM vendors that you would recognize actually can't do this, but there are some specialized DAM vendors that do, that are looking at the bigger picture rather than just managing images and video better for brand marketers and catalogs and things like that, to really look at a broader picture where copy and narrative and data are also first-class entities, and where you can manage not just component assets, but also the compounding of those assets and understand the different derivatives. So you may have one core video, but the way that's going to play out in TikTok versus Twitter versus Facebook could be very different. You may have 3 derivatives, but you want to be able to track those derivatives back to the parent and then understand where the usage is, and then bring in analytics data around how is the parent video performing as a whole across the 3 channels, and then how are the 3 derivatives performing, and why and where, and oh, by the way, what assets were included within these derivatives that may or may not, and as you know, there's a lot of interesting experimentation even going on with dynamic video. So that's just one example, of the complexity of this, but the desire to really understand what's working, and then B, based on what's working, how can we compose different experiences for different audiences and different channels. And this is what we've been trying to do for 25 years. And as you know, there's a lot of governance and execution issues holding us back from doing this. But historically, there was also, the fact that you might need to use 3 different platforms. And so right away, that was a barrier. And so recently, we've been managing some RFP processes, and it was really interesting, this one that we did for a big European transportation company, and they went out to some big name consulting firms whose names you would recognize, and they said, look, we want just one platform to do all of this, to have all of our customer care information for both agents as well as customers. We want all the classic digital asset management. We want to manage all of the component content within our catalog, and we want to manage our partner learning content and all this other stuff. It's all component content. It's all variety of different content types. We want to manage it in one place according to one metadata regime. And, 3 of the 4 major consultancies that they approached said, this is impossible. You cannot do this, but we'll put together a series of technologies that will cobble together into one solution for you. And it turns out they were wrong, that there were actually 3 finalists among software vendors that could actually do this. I can't name who those 3 were, but the market has matured now where there is such a thing as an omni-channel content platform. And so this gives us hope. Of course, as you know, the tool itself doesn't guarantee that you'll be able to execute on this, but it does create the kind of technical preconditions whereby with a sophisticated strategy, you can start having this kind of content control panel, similar to kind of some of the data and decisioning control panels that are beginning to emerge for marketers.
Okay, so this is very interesting, and I am agnostic to the one platform versus assembly. I am fine putting together integrated systems with multiple platforms if that's the best fit for the organization. If there is one platform that will do it, great, even simpler. For me, the Achilles heel of DAMs has always been, and this is one of the reasons that I've always worked closely with, I've been DAM adjacent. I've been mainly working with the people who actually have to create the content and create the text aspects of the content. And what DAM has never been good at is managing source. So it's been good at managing assets, but in terms of managing what the raw materials, I guess the small a assets, as you put it earlier, things like text assets, managing them and then managing the creation of them. So do you see that the DAMs are kind of reaching up earlier in the life cycle, or are we still going to be creating in upstream CMSs and tools and then publishing our assets to manage it into the DAM?
Yeah, it really depends. Certainly, if you're trying to be an OCP or omnichannel content platform, you have to deal with authoring and work in progress, right? But a lot of traditional DAM vendors are kind of snobbish about this. They have this idea. It's now become a rather quaint idea of a finished asset, right? There's such a thing as a finished asset. And what we're seeing in the omnichannel world is no asset is never actually finished, because they're constantly being derived. They're constantly being copied or used in different places. And so this line between a finished asset and a work in progress has become super blurry. And I think a lot of DAM vendors have missed that boat. They're still thinking back in a day of where DAM was originally created, which was creating image and video was so expensive that you just kept the finished asset, and it was like some piece of gold that cost you a lot of money and needed to be managed as an asset. And there was this misperception that text was really cheap and fungible, but assets were golden and unfungible. And that's just not true anymore on either count. And so
it was never true.
And
it's a fantasy we can't hold on to anymore.
Exactly. And so, just the minute you start talking about composability, you're talking about something that's a work in progress, right? Like if I have a video that's made up of some audio and transcripts and then images and other things, and I want to track the relationships and even maybe understand which ones are driving better performance, then I'm talking about a world of compound assets, and compound not just in the fact that there's many of them, but there's many different types of them, from data to images. And, I want to overlay a dynamic offer, which is a data element, on top of a dynamic image with some dynamic text that's going to appear in a particular dynamic order within an email. Managing, you can get there from a logic standpoint. You can figure out the logic to drive that, but then figuring out and managing all the piece parts that go into that gets really complicated. So we think OCPs are a step in the right direction.
Okay, so these are things where you would author in the actual OCP?
Well, the OCP is where you could potentially author them, or you could author them upstream. The idea is that these are the parts of your content that we would think of as enterprise content that you want them to be reused or derived or compounded in some way. So what this division of labor that we see happening is that the sort of omni-channel content is being managed at an enterprise level within these. And then there's always going to be channel specific content that could be managed in the channel. So in a web content management system, it might be long form content or case studies or story type content, where you're injecting some of the enterprise content into it from the OCP. But the web content managers are managing the long form content and the ultimate, experience of that. And so, that's where, and it's the same thing in your email platform, in your e-commerce platform. You're going to have some other content that's very channel specific that you can manage in channel, because it doesn't need to get beyond that channel. But anything that is more enterprisey is managed at a lower tier. And so, we call this sort of Pilates for your stack, where everybody's focused on looking really buff in their upper body where they're meeting the customer, but you better have really strong core muscles, or you're not going to be, as attractive as you think to the customer,
or strong. Yeah. So it's very interesting, because I get a little implication from what you're saying that it's still managing kind of like nuggets. They're more flexible nuggets. So let's try to make this more concrete. So I use a lot the Lego metaphor for component content, because everyone can get that. I hate the term atomic content. I think I've mentioned it on 50% of all podcasts. I hate that term, atomic content. It's what's simpler than particle physics. So I like Lego, easier to wrap your head around. So what I've always seen DAMs as being is that you carve out of wood or you mold out of clay your precious, beautiful assets, and then you put them in this very functional kind of Amazon warehouse where you can get them out and deliver them very easily. But now we're talking about not managing the finished, baked clay pot, but your entire Lego set, and all the different ways that those Legos have been put together in different combinations. So when you say like long form content in the web CMS, it's interesting because depending on the business, that's the stuff that they also want to manage in components, like specifically white papers, case studies, that kind of things. Those are the reusable components. And so I think I would like to delve into this. I'm very interested by this. First of all, I'm very excited that DAM is expanding its wings, because I think it's been I'm going to pronounce the oligarchy of the major DAM vendors has been holding us all back.
Yeah.
Of kind of trying to keep us in this world where you manage your content, then come to us to manage your assets. That dichotomy of all of the crazy, messy stuff that we need help managing happens outside of the DAM. And then once we have our nice, shiny assets, then we can manage them inside of the DAM. That separation of work, I think, was always crazy. So the fact that DAM is taking wider responsibility and thinking whole life cycle earlier and later, I think that's fantastic. But what I'm still hearing is that depending on what kind of content you're making, if you're making more text-based stuff and you have a more complex authoring process, you might still be looking at a DAM CMS integration of some kind to manage the nitty-gritty of the authoring bit, and then put these reusable units, even though they're very flexible and can be still Legoed together in the DAM, the actual authoring process could happen outside. So I'm interested to see where that goes. So I think that that's a watch this space kind of thing, which takes us directly back to headless, whose headache also seems to be authoring. I saw posts from Jeff Eaton on LinkedIn recently. Jeff's been on the podcast several times, and I've been on his. He's at Autogram, and he kind of did an Emperor's Wears No Clothes post saying that a lot of these headless CMSs are little more than content databases, and then you actually have to build the CMS on top of it to get it operational. I'm interested in your thoughts on that. I have a lot of involvement in the headless market and a lot of background with this kind of systems, so I'm interested in your take, which will probably be a fresh one for me.
Yeah, well, Jeff is absolutely right. I think the rise of headless has been a productive phenomenon, but it's been way overblown. Headless is a feature. And one of the things we've learned in 2.5 decades is you shouldn't buy technology just because of a particular feature. And I find it revealing that the headless vendors themselves typically sell into the technologists within an organization. You take a vendor like Contentful, they'll just tell you, look, we sell to developers. And it's
IT departments.
I mean, they shouldn't, these are not the people who should be making technology decisions. They should be contributing to technology decisions for sure. And, I can tell you stories of failed headless implementations where it just was a poor fit for some of the long form content, some of the page management. And so one of the things we've been advocating for 5 years or so is within a large enterprise that's going to have a multitude of use cases, what you really want is hybrid headless. So you want the ability for your content management system to be decoupled from whatever front end. But there are times when you also want to do bottom up or even top down page-based assembly and page-based curation and long form content. And the headless vendors tend to be very bad about that. And they say, don't worry your little self about what it looks like. And so here we had marketers working to liberate themselves from having to turn to developers to create experiences, working really hard, finally getting that capability after 15 years, and now being told that it's being taken away. That doesn't really sit very well always. So headless is really a feature in any new WCM. You should look for that as a feature, but it has been too much of a religious debate. That religious debate has led to unnecessary religious wars. And really the answer is that you really need hybrid. And moreover, again, we believe the scope of web CMS or WCM is narrowing as, first of all, other platforms become important in your omni-channel stack, A, and B, if you're saying that the reusable enterprise components are all going to be stored at a lower level in your stack so that they can be used across channels, then that's one less thing that a WCM needs to. So what's happening is the scope of WCM is getting narrower. First of all, there's other channels that you need to pay attention to. So relative to other channels, the scope of WCM is getting narrower. But secondly, if we look at WCM as handling more long-form content and website experience and those sorts of things, and that all of your reusable content and assets are being managed at a lower level in your enterprise, then the scope of what you're asking your WCM has also become narrower. And that's actually a good thing, because you have an opportunity now to get a simpler solution that's going to be right-sized for your stack, which typically means more agile, faster, cheaper, all that good stuff. And we're really encouraging our clients and subscribers not to overbuy in this space, but rather to right-size their WCM investments.
So this is very interesting, because I have been looking at instances where I'm looking at a headless implementation going, really,
Overkill.
No, more along the lines of what Jeff was saying, in the sense of, this is great as a repository for all of your systems to pull the eventual content from. And this will give you like all this good decoupled flexibility where you can build experiences in different ways with your content that you may have never imagined when you put it together. But this thing, you're going to have to build a whole CMS on top of it. So why don't we look at, and so this is where I kind of maybe diverge a little bit from what you're thinking, or your position, which is, can we look at a structured based system for managing content assets, and then we can deliver that into the web CMS when they're ready, or the headless CMS, whatever. And because usually in a large enterprise, what we're finding is there's never a enterprise system. There's maybe sometimes you get a DAM, which will be like the DAM. Sometimes you get 2 or 3 DAMs, but content management systems and content management pipelines, they're like mushrooms. So somewhere to single manage at least, let's say all of marketing, or all of medical science liaisons, or all of one big department, can they get all of their content assets into a single repository? And I think so that you said something very interesting, which is that the web CMS kind of still needs to be there for people to assemble the actual linear flows of the content and how things should be put together. I'm still against that the metaphor for that being the page, though, because
Sure.
There's lots of room for saying, okay, well, I'm gonna say how I create my assets, and then I'm going to describe how I output my assets. And we're even talking in projects where we're talking about the input model and the output model. Like, you have how you create your Lego pieces, and then you've got your instruction books of how you want your Lego pieces assembled. And you have to have very robust communication in between those layers, because you can't just create the Lego pieces in isolation saying, I'm going to make a brick. Someday someone will make something with my brick.
Yeah.
You have to have an
Well,
airplane
you're
and a
absolutely
helicopter in
right
mind.
that page is too narrow a concept. I was using it as kind of shorthand. The idea is that there's some experience on the other side of the screen, right? And that experience is going to be assembled in some ways. And there's times when you want to have that to be human curated, and there's times when it's going to be machine curated, and then often it's going to be blended, right? So web CMSs historically have been good at sort of human curated and mixed curated experiences, whether it's a mobile device or a website screen or part of an application, maybe. I think where I agree with you that structured content belongs in its own kind of separate place. Where I part ways is that separate place should be a headless WCM, because they think that they're good at managing omni-channel content, but they're not, because they tend to dismiss assets as a second-class citizen. They don't manage data as content. They often are slavishly relational in their information models, when really we need a more object-oriented hierarchical model. And so attempts to convert headless CMSs into a real OCP have generally come to failure. And so what is then going to be this structured repository? I don't think it's going to be a headless CMS. So in a way, they're kind of tweeners. They're not quite this unstructured repository that they want, and they're not a great place to assemble experiences, whatever that experience is. So what are they? They're a place for managing component narratives. Okay, fine, but that's too narrow a scope for me to justify the expense in many cases.
So yeah, it's interesting, and they're very popular. I'm often involved in helping people work with them to get the best out of them, and that's going to continue. I'm not seeing the headless market going away anytime soon. But I don't think we diverge there. So we agree that the headless content management, structured content management, is not the purview of your traditional web content management system, and trying to square that circle has been something that people have been trying to do for ages. Some of the CMSs have a little bit of a better kind of argument to say that they are actually hybrid decoupled. Others just want to say, hey, sure, we can do it too, and are really just kind of slapping a thin veneer over their traditional web content management paradigms. So it's I feel like we're leaving the audience with more questions than answers here, but I think that's the kind of market we're in right now. We got a lot of movement in a lot of directions, but it's not a clean market right now. I don't think that there's simple solutions, which I think keeps us in business. People have a lot of questions about, what is the right fit for my particular situation, and there's not simple, straightforward answers at this market. It's one of the most confused markets I've worked in the past 20, 25 years.
Yeah, and one thing that I think that remains a constant over the last 2 decades is that technology buyers face a greater risk of overbuying than underbuying. Is that overbuying ends up slowing you down, and so you have to be wary of, the Adobes and Microsofts and Oracles and Salesforces of this world who come in and say, if you just buy our heavyweight collection of different platforms that we've assembled by acquisitions, your life will be much easier. And that's almost never the case. In fact, your life can be notably harder. So it's really up to you to take responsibility for the technology decisions, for business people to be very aggressive and upfront and take a product management approach and really get the solutions that are going to work for them, rather than something that somebody tells them is going to work for them.
I think that's terminology which I really like and use a lot, which is telling, even if you're a content person, whether that's if you lean more digital asset management or you lean more text based, you should be thinking like a product manager. What are the features and functions that your experience needs to be able to deliver, and what is the appropriate platform for you to deliver that? If you don't have that worked out, you're being sold to rather than buying.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. So I think that's a great note to end on. If you're listening to this and you're feeling more confused than when you started, my apologies. But I think that's the reality of this market. I hope it's given you at least good perspective to see that there is a reason for you to feel confused. There is a reason for you to feel overwhelmed. There is a lot going out there. There is, you have to do your homework. You have to do your research, talk to people, find out what your options are, and find out what the best fit is for you. I think there's never been a better time for you to say, whatever my natural assumptions are, my first gut instinct of what to buy, this is the time to question it and do your homework properly. Any last notes you want to give people on your way out, Tony?
I think that we are now finally at a place where we can start thinking about enterprise components. For people have been thinking about this for a long time. XML was supposed to be the answer. These big enterprise content management systems were supposed to be the answer. None of those quite got us to where we wanted to go. I think there's a lot of things coming together right now, the omni-channel imperative, the opportunities around generative AI, whatever the still legitimate misgivings that we all have, that, some of the dreams that we've been having for 2.5 decades are more achievable now than they were even 3 years ago. And so I'm super excited on behalf of the enterprises that I see that are doing this, but they tend to be very savvy about the way that they make decisions and very deliberative about the investments they make. And so, my wish for you is to take the time to really make some good informed choices about the technology that you bring into your enterprise.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much, Tony. I think we're going to have you back sooner than I thought to try to clarify this. I would like to provide people maybe with some examples of what, like, if I have this kind of content, what kind of approach might be best, little, maybe even get not necessarily industry specific, but really like break down the life of some content, because I find it's hard. I find it's hard for people to wrap their heads around all these options.
For sure.
So thanks for helping me move that discussion forward today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us on the show, and you'll definitely be hearing from us in the future. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Remember to like and subscribe on whatever channel you're on, and tell your friends. Thank you very much, Tony.
Okay, thank you, Noz. Always good to chat with you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening. This has been the Omnichannel Podcast with Noz Urbina, founder of Urbina Consulting. Let us know on LinkedIn or Twitter what you liked from this episode, what you think we missed, who do you think we should interview next. And now that you've heard what we're passionate about, you can also check out urbinaconsulting.com to learn a little bit about what we do. See you next time.